November 19, 1942, Stalingrad, southern Soviet Union. The pale light of the winter morning barely pierced the sky, but Stalingrad remained submerged in the shadows of war. From the rubble, the biting cold pierced through, numbing every step. Fragments of the city lay scattered like silent witnesses to pain, awaiting the surge of another wave. The German forces were here, tightening their grip on the city, believing victory was within their reach. But at 6 a.m., just as all seemed quiet, the sky suddenly tore open with the roar of T-34 tanks and Il-2 Sturmovik bombers. The Soviet Red Army had been preparing for this moment, hidden in the darkness, waiting for the perfect opportunity. A counterattack of divine proportions that no one could have foreseen. Over 1,500 tanks, 1,400 aircraft, and thousands of Soviet soldiers suddenly struck from three directions, like a storm of fire descending from the abyss. Boom! The ground trembled beneath their feet, the explosion deafening. German forces, confident of victory, now stood frozen in shock, paralyzed by the overwhelming might of the Soviet offensive. We're surrounded. The aide of General Paulus, upon realizing the devastating truth. Smoke and flames engulfed the battlefield. The war had shifted into an entirely new phase, and no one could tell if the Germans would survive this nightmare. The mysterious, untold weapon, a divine counterattack. The Germans had marched into Stalingrad, but they had no idea that the Soviet Red Army had been preparing for this moment for months. Operation Uranus wasn't just any typical operation. It was a battle plan, meticulously crafted in secrecy, like the final move in a chess match with fate itself. At 6 a.m. on November 19, 1942, the T-34 tanks emerged from the mist, like metal beasts charging into the battlefield. One by one, they formed a swirling storm that stretched for miles, pushing the German forces into a trap they could never escape from. Behind the T-34s came the Il-2 Sturmovik, ground attack aircraft, devastatingly powerful, raining destruction down upon the Germans from the skies. At the same time, Soviet troops launched an assault from three directions, like a tsunami, forcing the Romanian and Hungarian forces to retreat, clearing the path for Soviet forces. This was a total counteroffensive, not just in terms of military might, but also in spirit. The Red Army wasn't just fighting to reclaim the city. They wanted to deliver a message of life, strength, and unyielding defiance to the Germans. A nightmare the Germans could never have imagined. "The nightmare has begun," a Soviet general said as he watched the German forces trapped in the perfect encirclement. Why did it happen? How strong was the enemy? What challenges did they face? By November 19th, 1942, the situation in Stalingrad had reached a point of no return. The brutal battle had lasted for 4 months, with the German forces, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, throwing everything they had into capturing the city. Stalingrad, with its strategic importance, was not just a city, but a living symbol of Soviet strength and resilience. This was why the Germans had to take it, to expand their power into the Caucasus and control crucial oil supplies for the war effort. When the German forces first entered the city in the summer of 1942, they were certain victory was inevitable. General Paulus and his commanders were overconfident, but they had underestimated the Soviet Red Army, who would never easily relinquish such a sacred piece of land. The German forces faced an enemy they could not defeat easily. The brutal winter, the devastating urban warfare, and a Soviet army determined to never accept defeat. While the Germans were trapped, battling through bone-chilling cold and cut off from supply lines, the Soviet spirit burned stronger than ever. At this moment, on 6 a.m., November 19th, the Soviet Union launched Operation Uranus, a plan that had been carefully prepared, ready to face the challenges of winter, scarcity, and relatively fewer troops compared to the German forces. The Red Army executed a perfect encirclement, leaving the Germans with no escape, despite their earlier belief that they had won. When the Soviet Red Army began their counterattack, the German forces could not believe their eyes. Shocked, horrified, and desperate, they realized they had walked straight into a trap from which there was no escape. The German and Soviet forces, both formidable opponents, but one of them would face inevitable annihilation. In the Battle of Stalingrad, weapons were not the only determining factor in victory. However, they played a crucial role in shaping the battlefield. And when comparing these two forces, the disparity was undeniably evident. The German forces boasted thousands of elite soldiers equipped with the latest weaponry, but a major mistake would soon prevent them from maximizing their full potential. Panzer III and IV, the tanks that Germany proudly possessed, seemed imposing, but when compared to the T-34, they quickly became ineffective. Speed. The T-34 was faster and more agile, able to navigate the harsh battlefield terrains with ease. Armor protection. The T-34 boasted thick armor, nearly impervious to the guns of the Panzer III and Panzer IV. Firepower. The T-34 was equipped with a 76.2mm cannon, far more powerful than the 50mm of the Panzer III or the 75mm of the Panzer IV, capable of piercing through the German tank armor with ease. In terms of air power, the Soviet Union proved its superiority with the Il-2 Sturmovik, one of the most devastating ground attack aircraft of the time. The Il-2 Sturmovik had the ability to accurately strike ground targets, from tanks to German defensive positions. In contrast, the Junkers Ju-87, a dive bomber, was far less effective in urban warfare, where the Il-2 could easily tear through defenses without being detected. With a combination of the T-34 and the Il-2, the Soviet Red Army not only defended, but also counterattacked with absolute power. As the battle raged on, the Soviets didn't just outnumber the Germans, they outclassed them in terms of weapon quality. This left the German forces unable to maintain their offensive strength, even though they possessed advanced weaponry. Stalingrad wasn't just a battlefield. It was a place where men faced death every day, yet never gave in. General Vasily Chuikov, the commander of the Soviet Red Army, wasn't just a brilliant military leader. He was the embodiment of unbreakable resilience. Through endless nights in the besieged city, where the cold seeped into their bones and death loomed around every corner, he remained steadfast. Every decision he made could change the course of the battle. In the most desperate moments, he would say, "We will never give up Stalingrad." At one of the most brutal frontline positions, Anatoly Buryakov, a young T-34 tank commander of the Red Army, faced a challenge like no other. His T-34 was surrounded by a sea of flames. Blood poured from his wounds, but he never gave up. He steered the tank through the hellish fire, not for himself, but for the comrades who were counting on him. Buryakov said, "We do not fight for ourselves. We fight for our homeland, for our people." And he drove his T-34 through the bullets and smoke, to rescue his comrades. General Paulus, facing encirclement, with German forces now unable to strike back, could only watch as the empire he served crumbled. His pride shattered in that moment. As the Germans lost their supply lines and their communication networks were severed, he had no choice but to face the grim reality of surrender. While the Soviet Red Army continued to fight, the German spirit was slowly crushed. "We cannot win this war." The words of General Paulus echoed in his mind as he signed the surrender document. Meanwhile, Soviet soldiers, hungry, exhausted, yet determined, fought on with their unshakable belief in victory. One Soviet soldier said, as he stood facing the oncoming barrage, "If I die for my homeland. But I will fight until my last breath." February 2nd, 1943. The military catastrophe that the German forces never imagined had occurred. After over 2 months of fighting under brutal conditions, the German forces were completely encircled in Stalingrad. In that moment, General Paulus was forced to order the surrender. No one in the German army could believe their eyes. This was the first time in history that a German general had to surrender in battle. The smoke and the constant roar of artillery filled the air, but the Soviet Red Army's resolve remained unbroken. The sight of German surrender was a shock not only militarily, but psychologically. 250,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, a devastating defeat the Nazi regime had never experienced. The Soviet Red Army did not just win a battle, they shattered Germany's entire war strategy. As the German forces retreated, the Soviets didn't just control Stalingrad, they now controlled the Eastern Front, breaking the myth of German invincibility. At this moment, German military commanders understood that victory was no longer within their reach. General Zhukov, in a meeting with his commanders, proudly declared, "Today we've won not just a battle, but we've struck a deadly blow to the Germans. They can no longer continue winning. This counterattack reshaped the war." From here, Nazi Germany could never recover, and the Soviet victory at Stalingrad paved the way for future victories such as Kursk and Berlin. Stalingrad was not just a victory for the Soviet Union, but a turning point in history, opening a new chapter in World War II, where the Allied counteroffensive would never again be halted. Victory at Stalingrad wasn't just a military win, it was a turning point in history that completely reshaped the course of World War II. On February 2, 1943, when General Paulus was forced to surrender, the Soviet Red Army didn't just defeat the German forces, they crushed the belief in victory held by Nazi Germany. It was a defining moment, where not only a city was reclaimed, but Germany's belief in invincibility shattered. Stalingrad became a symbol of resilience, fighting spirit, and never surrendering. This victory decided the war on the Eastern Front, marking the beginning of a new era in warfare. No longer was it a continuous offensive by Germany, but a grand counteroffensive, where the Soviet Red Army pushed Germany into an inescapable situation. The Soviets had turned the tide, from defense to attack, from hopelessness to absolute victory. Stalingrad wasn't just a victory for the Soviet Union, but a triumph of unity, of an unyielding spirit. It was a lesson in flexible strategy. When faced with the wall of defeat, sometimes you need a devastating counterattack. And it was this counterattack that destroyed Germany's hopes. Nazi Germany didn't just lose the battle, they lost their strategic confidence. But the bigger lesson from Stalingrad wasn't just about defeating the enemy, it was about never giving up. After Stalingrad, all the great battles that followed, like Kursk and Berlin, were just a natural continuation of the victory at Stalingrad. The Soviet Red Army showed that a war isn't won by numbers alone, but by willpower and strategy. Stalingrad didn't just change the course of the war, it opened a new chapter where the world realized that Nazi Germany could not win. Stalingrad, a legendary victory, one that not only changed history, but also lit a flame of hope and belief in the strength of humanity. You've witnessed the resilience, sacrifice, and victory of the Soviet Red Army. But this story is far from over. We've only begun to uncover the untold stories of this brutal war, of the warriors who fought not just for land, but for the belief in a better future. If you want to continue the journey to dive deeper into the hidden secrets of history, the strategies untold, and the great sacrifices of nameless soldiers, don't miss out on the untold stories of World War II. Join us at Oblivion Archive, where the stories that have never been told will unfold before your eyes, not just as part of history, but as lessons for the future. Because history isn't just the past, it's the key to understanding the present and shaping the future.